Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully you all are having a wonderful day today. So when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video by Dante's Boxing Nation. And today, once again, we were going to be talking about Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And I do understand that I've talked quite a bit about him lately, but there's probably going to be a certain amount of more videos that I may do on him just because, like I said, I think that it's very, very interesting the way that Mr. Canelo Alvarez's career is panning out, at least as of right now. And I do think that Mr. Canelo Alvarez, that he is paving his way to become an all-time great fighter. And I do believe that maybe eventually he could become even debatably a top 10 boxer of all time. He could debatably get there. And I see a certain amount of channels, I see a certain amount of people, whether they be against or for Canelo Alvarez. There actually is a certain amount of people that believe that the Canelo Alvarez versus Alexander Usyk fight, that actually is the right way to go next, at least for Canelo Alvarez, or somewhere later on down the road. And I think that that's an interesting fight, but I think at least as of right now, until Canelo Alvarez has proved that not only can he handle a cruiserweight like Onlunga Makabu, who of course is a sturdy fight for Canelo next, but in my opinion, of course, Onlunga Makabu, he is someone that Canelo more than likely can handle, although it'll be interesting to see what happens because like I said, Onlunga Makabu, he is a person with decent power and decent size over Canelo Alvarez. So I think that is basically Canelo Alvarez not only going for a title chase, but I think that also basically is him testing the waters and dipping his toe into the water to basically feel the temperature or basically overall get adjusted to basically the light heavyweights. And if he's able to unify the light heavyweights, we then may see Canelo Alvarez go after an Alexander Usyk. It may be possible, although if I had to guess, more than likely the fight may happen at a weight drain. But we'll see all in all what happens because Mr. Canelo Alvarez, like I said, you know, boxing has a great amount of plans with Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see where he goes. But anyways, today in Dante's Boxing Nation, he is going to say that if Canelo Alvarez is going to face a cruiserweight, that he should face someone like that of an Alexander Usyk. And this is why I always say, you know, even for the people that go against Canelo Alvarez, you can tell that Mr. Canelo Alvarez is on the next level compared to everybody else, at least in the sport of boxing right now. Because no one would be asking, at least just out of nowhere, that if Terence Bud Crawford, if he were to go up to middleweight, or if he was going to go up to 168 to possibly win a title, I'll compare it to 160. Because I don't think Onlunga Makabu is that much bigger than Canelo Alvarez, although I would say that he is probably a couple weight classes bigger than that of a Canelo Alvarez. You could debate. But when it comes down to it, that would be like Terence Bud Crawford if he went to 160. And all in all, you know, if he were to face, you know, someone on the Alexander Usyk level, that would be like Terence Bud Crawford facing a Canelo Alvarez or a Gennady Golovkin at their peak, basically, and asking him to defeat one of those fighters, or someone like an Errol Spence Jr. And even though I think that those two are great fighters, I just don't know overall if they would be able to get past the size and the skill set of those two fighters. But I could be wrong. But that's how you know that Canelo Alvarez is on a whole nother level, because it was the same energy with Floyd Mayweather Jr. It was the same energy with many, many other #1 pound-for-pound fighters before him. All right, whether it be Roy Jones Jr. or Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr., Sugar Ray Robinson, you know, a certain amount of other fighters. The public is never satisfied overall with whatever challenges come your way. There's always some new excuse, or people always say, well, why can't you do this? Why can't you do this? And the demands seem to almost be impossible. And it's really at that point to where you know that's when you're really on top of your game. That's when you know that you're separated on a different level compared to everybody else. When people put standards on you that they don't put on anybody else. So even the people all in all that may hate Canelo Alvarez, even the people that may try to tear him down, they are somewhat giving off the energy that they intuitively know that Mr. Canelo Alvarez, he is on a different level. But anyways, let's get into the video. Let's see what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Boy, oh boy, this list just gets longer and longer by the day when it comes to the fighters that Canelo Alvarez and his team are making it very clear they don't want to fight. Or maybe I should say they're not going to fight. After Demetrius Andrade chased Canelo Alvarez for 6 years through 2 different weight classes, Canelo finally says he will never fight against Andrade because he's a, quote, horrible fighter. More recently, the boxing world has been putting a lot of pressure on Canelo Alvarez.
I've already said this about Demetrius Andrade. I think that he's a good fighter. I don't really know how great of a fighter he is. What I will say is this. I do think that Saul Canelo Alvarez realizes about Demetrius Andrade that he may be a little bit too much trouble for his worth. Like I said, Andrade, he is a decently slick fighter. When he is at his best, he is decently troubling. And I don't think that anyone is going to face Demetrius Andrade, not even just Saul Canelo Alvarez. I don't think that anyone is going to face him within those weight divisions unless they're absolutely forced to. But we'll see what Mr. Demetrius Andrade does, in my opinion. You know, if you're in that position of a Guillermo Rigondeaux or someone all in all, you know, like a Gennady Golovkin or someone overall to where, you know, you may have certain opportunities here and there, but a lot of the guys, you know, they may not want to face you, especially in your own weight division. That means that you're going to have to work harder. It just is what it is. That means that you're going to have to take certain opportunities that, you know, they may seem ridiculous or it may seem all in all that, you know, it's unfair, but you're just going to have to take that. Because at the end of the day, Demetrius Andrade, if he probably wants to get that Saul Canelo Alvarez fight, he's either going to have to get one or two fights. He's either going to have to get the Jamal Charlo fight or the David Benavidez fights. And in my opinion, apparently David Benavidez, he says that he's willing to take on all comers. I would love to see David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade.
Alvarez to take the David Benavidez fight. As soon as this information got to Canelo, he said he's not fighting against David Benavidez. David Benavidez hasn't fought anyone. He hasn't done anything. Well, I guess that explains why Canelo fought Yildirim, and now he wants to fight Makabu, right? We know what time it is. But speaking of Makabu, since Canelo was willing to go up and fight against a cruiserweight, the former undisputed cruiserweight champion, Alexander Usyk, he said that he will come back down to cruiserweight and fight Canelo Alvarez. Now, once again, let me remind you guys, Canelo Alvarez is pursuing a fight with Makabu, who is a cruiserweight belt holder. He's the WBC champion. So what did Canelo's trainer say when it came to a possible fight with him and Usyk? They said, no way. He said that fight is not going to happen. Usyk is a heavyweight. And then,
well, he's a very, very decent-sized cruiserweight. He's a person that's 6'3", like I said, with a 78-inch reach. He can rehydrate maybe at around 225 pounds. He would be decently bigger than Canelo in terms of weight, in terms of height, in terms of reach. And they're both A-grade fighters. I just don't see Saul Canelo Alvarez. If he does take that fight, I think it would be at the end of his career where Canelo basically says, I have nothing left to prove. Let's make this fight.
he started saying, I would rather my heavyweight Frank Sanchez get in the ring with Usyk, but there's no way.
That would be a fantastic fight. Frank Sanchez in that last fight against that one African fighter, F.A. Egjagba. Now I knew that F.A. Egjagba more than likely was probably going to lose that fight because F.A. Egjagba, he reminds me of like a lesser version of Deontay Wilder with just not as much power. So it just is what it is. Frank Sanchez was able to completely embarrass that dude. Frank Sanchez is a decent fighter with decent power, and Canelo probably spars with Frank Sanchez. So do I believe that there could be in store a move to heavyweight eventually for Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez? I believe that that is very possible. So we'll see what happens. But as for Alexander Usyk versus Frank Sanchez, that would be a terrific fight. To be honest with you, I actually don't know who would win that one.
Canelo is going to be fighting against Usyk. Okay, so you heard Eddie Reynoso's excuse for why Canelo wasn't going to fight Usyk is because the man is a heavyweight, right? But I want you guys to hear what Eddie Reynoso said when he was explaining why they decided to pursue the Makabu fight. This is exactly what Eddie Reynoso said. Quote, I know what he has done to heavyweights that he has sparred with, and that is the reason why we have asked for this fight with Makabu. End quote. So you know what he did in sparring with heavyweights, but clearly you don't think it's good enough for Canelo Alvarez to beat the best cruiserweights in the...
This dude all in all is such an idiot. Dante's Boxing Nation, he just misses the mark almost every single time because I think he has about 2 brain cells, 2 marbles rattling around up in that skull of his. Like I said, no one is saying that Ulunga Makabu, at least in my opinion, that he's an A-grade fighter. Now, Dante, apparently not too long ago, one of your favorite boys, Gervonta Tank Davis, he called out Mr. Keith Thurman. Now, Keith Thurman, and we know how Dante's Boxing Nation, once again, he always loves to go on this rant and say that Canelo Alvarez only fights people off the worst performances and, you know, people who have already been beaten, yada, 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 yada. Well, Gervonta Tank Davis not too long ago called out Keith one-time Thurman, if he was even serious about that. Because Gervonta Tank Davis, he'll call out certain people and then he'll never mention their name again. So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, he would fight Keith Thurman, who was coming off of a loss. And don't get me wrong, Keith Thurman is in a grade, welterweight. I think that would be a great win if Gervonta Tank Davis were able to pull it off. But that would be like the difference between facing a Keith Thurman or facing a Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. for Gervonta Tank Davis. No one is, I didn't hear you say, oh, well, if Gervonta Tank Davis is really going to fight a real welterweight, I don't think that he should go after Keith Thurman. I think that overall he should go after someone like Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. Now, why didn't you say that? Because it would be ridiculous to ask Gervonta Tank Davis to fight someone like that. Because Gervonta Tank Davis is a dude that is 5'6", if that, with a 67-inch reach. Terrence Bud Crawford, Errol Spence, they have around the 72 to 74-inch reaches, and on top of that, they have A-grade power. And near the same skill set as a Gervonta Tank Davis. So when it comes down to it, that would be ridiculous to ask of that fight. I think that the Ilunga Makabu versus Canelo fight, that's understandable. Like I said, that's why I compared to the Roy Jones Jr. versus John Ruiz fight. Because, Roy Jones Jr. versus, say, Lennox Lewis, a lot of people probably maybe wanted to see that fight. And a lot of people, I could sit here, bitch, moan, and complain about, well, Roy Jones, we can't ever really call him a legitimate heavyweight champion because he never fought Lennox Lewis. He never fought the best overall heavyweight in the division. We can say that, but at the end of the day, Roy Jones Jr., it was special that he was even able to get the heavyweight championship to begin with because he's not a natural heavyweight. It just is what it is. He's a person that, is 6 foot, if that, when it comes down to it, with a 74-inch arm reach, and then he rehydrates at about 192 at max. Even the person, John Ruiz, who I didn't think was necessarily an A-grade skilled fighter, but a decent fighter, he was decently bigger than that of Roy Jones Jr. Not necessarily with the height and reach, but with the weight, he outweighed him by 30 damn pounds. So, like I said, that like the Alexander Usyk versus Canelo fight, that's like if Terrence Bud Crawford and Gervonta Tank Davis were to fight next, and we were to expect Gervonta Tank Davis to possibly beat a Terrence Bud Crawford. So it is what it is.
Division, right? Now, guys,
and that's why I say there is no expectations on any of the fighters back more heavy today than a Saul Canelo Alvarez. And you know why that is? Because everyone knows intuitively that he's on a different level. It was the same thing with Floyd Mayweather Jr. That's why people were never happy with whoever Floyd beat. They always said, oh, go up, fight Golovkin. Go up, fight Sergio Martinez. Why don't you fight this guy? Why don't you fight this guy? And the guy would outweigh Floyd by like damn near 30 pounds. It's the same thing with Saul Canelo Alvarez.
It would be a complete different situation if Canelo was one of those special type of fighters. If he was really a pound-for-pound fighter who dominated all of the best fighters in whatever division he was in. I had
to tell you this, Dante. Canelo is a dominant pound-for-pound fighter. What is this narrative overall that Dante's always trying to push? If Canelo were truly a dominant pound-for-pound fighter, what fighters do you necessarily put over him? Even Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence would some be understandable, but who the hell else on your list? Let's be real. We all know what type of fighters are on Dante's list. So, what? Gervonta Tank Davis, Jamel Charlo, Deontay Wilder, pretty much those ones. There's a pattern there. It is what it is. But when it comes down to it all in all, who are you going to put above Canelo? Even if we just take a look, if we're being logical and objective, if we take a look at all the demographics all around, who are we going to put over him? It can't be Alexander Usyk. It can't be Terrence Crawford. It can't be Errol Spence. It can't be Tyson Fury. It can't be, Vasyl Lomachenko. It can't be Gervonta Tank Davis. It can't be Naoya Inoue. It can't be, Juan Francisco Estrada. It can't be Artur Beterbiev. Those are pretty much the fighters that are within my top 10 to top 15 pound per pound. And there may be a couple of others that I'm personally missing. It can't be any of those fighters. The only, Shakur Stevenson, he may get up there eventually. He did have a very great win last time over a decent champion in Jamel Herring, although I would say that he was B class, not A class. But when it comes down to it all in all, you can't place any of these fighters above Saul Canelo Alvarez. At the end of the day, can you say that Canelo maybe has done some maneuvering here and there? You could possibly say that. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But once again, I'm a results-oriented person. I'm not going to give you the title of #1 pound-for-pound fighter, or, if I'm watching football, best quarterback in the league or best team in the league until I 100% for sure see that is 100% proven. So it is what it is. And with Canelo, you can say all you want to that he hasn't fought David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, and Demetrius Andre, but at the end of the day, he has so many A-grade names on his list. It just is what it is.
Always the best in every division he was in, right? When he was at 154, he cleaned the division out. The Charlo brothers, Andrade, Lara, moved up to 160, wiped the division out. moved up to 168.
But this is the problem. This is the point that Dante always tries to allege. You know, it would be different, like I said, if he was a Mikey Garcia and at times he didn't face the overall #1 contenders. Now, once again, I get it. Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andrade and David Benavidez, all those guys are very interesting fights, and I would love to see those fights later on down the line. Every single one of us would love to see those fights. But at the end of the day, Dante is acting like Canelo has never fought top contenders. He fought and beat Araceli Lara when Lara was the #1 contender, and to be quite honest with you, in my opinion, even as a professional, was always way more skilled than that of either Charlo brother, and probably even a little bit more skilled than that of Demetrius Andrade. Certain people would disagree, but that's just my view, because I really don't see any proof of how Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade were more talented than Lara, but that's my personal opinion. It just is what it is. You know, I can maybe see an argument for Andrade, but not the Charlo brothers. And at the end of the day, not only that, but he beat Austin Trout. He went up to middleweight. He beat Miguel Cotto. And then he beat Gennady Golovkin. Now, you can bitch, moan, and complain all you want to and say, well, Gennady, you know, he wasn't really that great. No, yes, he was. Gennady was, you know, a great, great fighter. He had a very extensive and expansive amateur background. He was knocking everyone out in that division. He had 2 or 3 titles around his waist, almost completely unified that division, and it was taken away because he lost to Saul Canelo Alvarez, especially in the rematch. So he defeated the guy that was looked at as hands down the #1 middleweight in the world. You can bitch, moan, and complain about that all you want to, but it is what it is. And then he goes up to 168. At first he beats Rocky Fielding, but then he beats Callum Smith, he beats Caleb Plant, and he also beats Billy Joe Saunders. Now, if you want to debate that David Benavidez is debatably the most athletically gifted guy there, you could debate that, but like I said, all those fighters that he beat, they're at least somewhat on the same level as David Benavidez. I do not see in David Benavidez what so many people see. To be honest with you, I don't think a lot of these people really see in David Benavidez what they're really saying. I just think they're saying that so they can tear down Saul Canelo Alvarez's name, because as soon as Canelo overall faces David Benavidez, if he does, which I believe that he eventually will sometime within the next couple of years, but I believe more than likely he's probably going to go after 175, pounds first. Whoever Canelo Alvarez faces for these guys, they always tear it down. Oh, well, that guy's already lost. He was coming off of his worst performance. He was doing this. He was doing that. Canelo's the vulture. He's an opportunist. I'm not saying that he's not an opportunist here and there. But when it comes down to it, like I said, these guys have given Saul Canelo Alvarez no credit whatsoever for whatever win that he got. Whether it be Danny Jacobs, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, all these fighters at one point in time were allegedly dangerous fights for Canelo. And then when he took them, they basically strip cut it away. So it is what it is.
Talking about including David Benavidez, right? Then he decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cherry pick a title at the cruiserweight division. Then it would not look that bad, because you have already...
In my opinion, it's not really cherry picking if the fight someone makes sense. Now once again, if you're Mikey Garcia that, slithers in and out of the weight divisions and clearly is always avoiding the #1 contender or the biggest threat in the division, that's a different situation. But Saul Canelo Alvarez has not done that. You can say that he hasn't fought Charlo, Andrade, or David Benavidez yet, but at the end of the day, like I said, he's fought big threats before. He fought Araceli Lara, who was looked at as an A-grade fighter at that point in time. As an A-grade fighter. He was a person that basically was undefeated. Now, he did have that one loss to Paul Williams, but don't even bring that up because that was the biggest robbery that I've personally ever seen probably in boxing history. So he fought Lara, he fought Austin Trout, basically 2 undefeated fighters. He beat them. He went up to middleweight. He beat Miguel Cotto when it came down to it, who was at a very decent point in his career. He beat Gennady Golovkin, who was the biggest threat there. And then at 168, whether you want to debate that, the fighters that he fought were the biggest threats, there, or at least the #1 threat there, that's your business. But at the end of the day, he unified the division. And let's just be real. Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, and Billy Joe Saunders, they're all at least on the A-grade level. And I know I'm going to get a certain amount of people that say, oh, no, they're not. They're C-grade fighters. How can you say that they're C-grade fighters? Take a look at Billy Joe Saunders, for example. He beat Chris Eubank Jr. overall in a very competitive fight. He beat David Lemieux, and he also beat Andy Lee. All those fighters are at least on the B-grade level. All those fighters at one point in time, I believe, were champions. So it is what it is. All right? Billy Joe Saunders, when it comes down to, that's why I say, people always try to say that, oh, it's, the most dangerous fighters. Those fighters like Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, and David Benavidez, they're pretty much on the same level as those other fighters as I just mentioned. So it is what it is.
dominated.
Now, if you want to say that Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant don't have as much athleticism or power as some of those other guys, you can debate that. But once again, I've already said this. This is my personal opinion, at least about David Benavidez and Charlo. I can understand the Andre point, but Charlo and Benavidez especially, I've never gotten this point because people always say that, oh, Canelo, he's avoiding the dangerous fighters. You know, he's avoiding the slick fighters. Is David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo really that slick? Once again, take a look at Jamal Charlo versus Matt Korobov. You tell me that he's a slick fighter. He's not a slick fighter. He's not a slick fighter. Never has been. He's a decent fighter. I'm not saying that he doesn't have some slick moves here and there. What he is a bigger version of Danny Garcia. That's what he is. David Benavidez, in my opinion, I think that he's a very, very good fighter. And once again, like I've always said a million times, this isn't me saying that I would not love to see these fights. I would love to see these fights. But even if Canelo, let's say this, if he gets the victories over David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo, in my opinion, are those wins really that much more impactful than that of a Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, or a Caleb Plant? No, in fact, they're on the exact same level.
In so many other divisions where there was no doubt you were the best. So you move up and you fight the weakest cruiserweight, it doesn't look that bad. But the problem is, Canelo Alvarez is always looking for the weakest link in every single division he campaigns at. And
well, you can argue this for a couple of fights that he has had. You can argue maybe that he did that with Liam Smith when he had the title because he was a C-grade fighter. You can argue that maybe he did that with Sergey Kovalev and Ilunga Makabu. But the reason why I don't have a problem with those fights is because Saul Canelo Alvarez was just going into 175 and Sergey Kovalev still was an A-grade fighter when he fought him. So it just is what it is, at least an A- fighter, because he was coming off of 2 decent victories. Of course, once again, he was not the same fighter overall that Andre Ward had fought. Like I said, I'll admit that. But when it comes down, I think, you know, that's just a logical and objective way to say it because that's the truth. But when it comes down to it, don't just sit here and try to pretend like Sergey Kovalev was just some bum off the side of the street. He was a very, very decently competitive fighter. And if Jamal Charlo or Andrade or one of the fighters that Dante always tries to hype up, if they would have challenged Sergey Kovalev next to a fight, what do you think that he would have said? Oh, this is a super fight. We know that Dante would have said that because we've already seen what he's done with bullshit like that before. Once again, go ahead, check out my video not too long ago. Some of you guys may have seen it if you're newer to the channel or if you've been around for a little bit when it comes down to it because I didn't release this video too long ago. It was about a week ago, maybe less than a week ago. And it was a video titled, New Media Admits That Canelo Alvarez is the Best. All right, when it comes down to that Canelo Alvarez is the best admits New Media. Because what did Dante say when Jamal Charlo apparently is going to face Caleb Plant next? He said, that's a great first fight for, you know, Jamal Charlo. So why is Jamal Charlo allowed to face Caleb Plant? And apparently that's a great fight. But Canelo Alvarez, once again, there's a reason why Dante says those type of things because he knows Canelo's on a different level. It is what it is. It's the same thing with Gervonta Tank Davis. People will bitch, moan, and complain overall about certain opponents that he faces. And don't get me wrong, Gervonta is not facing usually A-grade fighters. But, you know, with this Isaac Cruz situation, people may complain that Gervonta Tank Davis faced Isaac Cruz. And in my opinion, I don't think Isaac Cruz is an A-grade fighter. But he did show off more impressive than what a lot of people thought that he would. He did show that he had some grit. Well, next he's looking to possibly face Ryan Garcia. And a lot of people are saying, wow, that's a great fight. But the reason why people are saying that's a great fight versus Gervonta Tank Davis and saying that that wasn't a great fight is because people intuitively know, whether they want to admit it or not, that Gervonta Tank Davis is on a completely whole nother level compared to that of Ryan Garcia. It's the same thing with Saul Canelo Alvarez.
Finally found a division that had nothing but weak champions when he moved up to 168. And now that he's won all the belts at that weak division, where does he go from here? The saddest thing is Canelo has more options than any other fighter. He could make the fights that the fans really want to see. It's completely up to him, but he's not willing to do it. And this is why it makes no sense when I hear some of you Canelo Alvarez fans sitting over here saying, man, he can fight whoever he wants. I want to ask you guys this. How does a fighter...
Well, like I said, Canelo can face whoever he wants because he's the golden goose of boxing. And they've even tried to tear him down with that. So like I said, you know, you can tell with the stuff that they say about Canelo, they have a personal issue with him. It's not overall about who he fights. It's not about this. It's not about that. These dudes do not like Canelo Alvarez because they're not only trying to tear it down overall. It'd be different if maybe they were just saying that, you know what, you know, I think Canelo is a very great fighter, but, you know, I really want to see him face Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andrade. It'd be a little bit different if it were just like that. Like I've seen certain channels like Fanon overall talk about it like that, and I think that that's decently fair. It's fair overall, to say it like that. But if you're just going to try to tear him down at every single turn, and you try to use everyone's name to tear down Saul Canelo Alvarez's name, and then as soon as he fights those guys, you basically tear down every victory that he gets. And then on top of that, you're saying he's not even the face of boxing. He's not overall even the main golden goose. Like you're literally trying to tear down things that at that point in time, it's not even, like that's not even debatable at that point. It's just factual that Saul Canelo Alvarez, he is the face of boxing. He is the person that earns the most amount of money. Like I said, you don't earn 900,000 pay-per-view buys. You don't get 900,000 pay-per-view buys because you're facing cupcakes. I don't care who you are. Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought Andre Berto, who was a decent ranked fighter, but not an A-grade fighter. And now, of course, that was the last fight in his career. Some may argue that. But, and he kind of got past Manny Pacquiao, so maybe a lot of people were not interested in it because it was more of a showcase fight. But at the end of the day, that only got 400,000 pay-per-view buys. This Canelo Alvarez fight got 900,000 pay-per-view buys. You don't get 900,000 pay-per-view buys, 100,000 away from 1 million pay-per-view buys, which is a great, great standard when it comes down to it. It hasn't usually been set ever since Floyd Mayweather left boxing. You don't get that unless you're facing the best of the best.
Fighting whoever he wants. Meaning it doesn't matter if it's a cherry pick, if it's a super easy foregone conclusion. He can fight whoever he wants. How does that benefit you as a boxing fan? You see,
or like what I should say is this, because they try to even lie about Saul Canelo Alvarez's numbers are overall basically twist it and turn it in a negative way. That's how they have a personal problem with Saul Canelo Alvarez, because even the stuff that is factual, they'll try to basically turn it into an opinion, or they'll try to turn it into something and basically rewrite history or rewrite the way things happen, and it just didn't happen that way.
What these fans are really telling you is, as long as it's a guaranteed win for Canelo Alvarez, that's all that matters. I don't care if it's a mismatch. I don't care if it's someone no one has even heard of. As long as it's going to be another W on Canelo's record, that's all that matters to me. They're telling you they're not boxing.
Well, like I said, Canelo Alvarez, after the Ilunga Makabu fight, I think that it's an acceptable fight because it's a title chase for history. I don't have a problem with it. But after that fight, he is going to have to face someone with legitimate pedigree. And I think that it is going to be more than likely Joe Smith Jr. Once again, I don't think that Joe Smith Jr., I don't necessarily think that he's necessarily an A-grade fighter. But he is challenging because he is bigger than Canelo. I believe he has a longer reach. He's taller. And Joe Smith Jr., that's a dude that has a lot of power. You want to talk about someone that has A-grade power. Joe Smith Jr., like I said, he touches you, he'll knock your lights out. That dude's nothing to mess around with. But I bet you money that if that fight happens. Now, Dante just not too long ago, and I reviewed this in another video of mine that you can check out, where I said Canelo going to unify the 175-pound division. Now, I've made a few videos about that conversation, but this video, I believe, was posted a little over a week ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago now. It was about 17 minutes long. It was one of my shorter videos, and it has a picture of, I think it says, can Canelo unify 175 pounds? And it has a picture of Anthony Yarde, Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez, Dimitri Bivol, Artur Beterbiev, and Saul Canelo, and I think Joe Smith Jr. and Saul Canelo Alvarez. So go ahead and check out that video if you don't believe me. Dante's Boxing Nation said that any of those fights at 175, at least against the champions for Canelo, would be great fights. But I'm betting you money that if Canelo faces Joe Smith Jr. next, I know exactly what he's going to say. He's going to say that he's picking the weakest link, and he would be somewhat correct. But at the end of the day, if you're going after one of the decent champions, especially at 175, I don't think that there's a problem with that, especially someone that is an A-grade athlete or someone overall that has A-grade power.
Fans. These are race fans. And this is the reason why Terrence Crawford is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. Because while Canelo is going after Makabu,
Terrence Bud Crawford cannot be the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world because he's not fighting the competition that Canelo is. You notice that Terrence Bud Crawford, these guys always like the circle jerk about how Terrence Bud Crawford was unified. Terrence Crawford, this is no disrespect to Terrence Crawford, out of any recent unified champion that I've personally ever seen, recently, out of Alexander Usyk, Josh Taylor, Saul Canelo Alvarez, out of any other fighter that I've seen, now Bernard Hopkins, I'm not really going to talk about that one because I would need to see a little bit more, but from the record that I looked at, it didn't really seem, overly impressive until he fought Jermaine Taylor, but maybe that was just me. Terrence Bud Crawford and a certain amount of people, they're going to think overall that I'm like raised baiting Terrence Crawford, but I'm not trying to do this, but it's just the facts. It just is what it is. Terrence Bud Crawford, out of any more recent unified champion, he unified the weakest division hands down. At the time, he beat the weakest champions out of any recent unified champion, and these guys love the circle jerk over about how Terrence Crawford completely unified 140. Let's go over who Terrence Bud Crawford defeated in order to become unified at 140, and then I'll tell you the people that Alexander Usyk and Josh Taylor and Saul Canelo Alvarez beat. Let's go over it. Because these guys, once again, they always love to make the point overall. Oh, well, you know, Canelo and these guys are facing weak Caucasian fighters. So let's go over overall the fighters that they all fought. Terrence Bud Crawford, the first person that he beat at 140 to become a champion, was a person that, first of all, has never even won a belt in his career. I'm talking about one of the legitimate belts. That was Mr. Thomas Delorme. Thomas Delorme is a person that has lost every single big fight in his career. The biggest victory in his career, I believe, is getting a draw over Jesse Vargas, and on top of that, getting a win over Hammer Hank Lundy, who is a known C-grade fighter. That I believe is where Terrence Bud Crawford ended up getting the WBA title. Could have been the WBO, I can't remember. His next fight overall was against Victor Postal. Victor Postal is a very decent fighter. If you want to debate him as A-, you could, but that's another fighter who has lost every big fight in his career when it comes down to, besides that of the Lucas Matisse fight. At least with the Billy Joe Saunders, you can argue that he beat David Lemieux, Chris Eubank Jr., and Andy Lee. Now, I don't think any of those guys are necessarily on the A-grade level, but I didn't necessarily think that, you know, Lucas Matisse was 100% on the A-grade level either, because if we're going to be honest about Lucas Matisse, he pretty much has lost every big fight in his career as well. It just is what it is. But if you wanted to debate Victor Postal as A-, I could give you that one, whatever. Then he faces Julius Ndongo, who won his titles over Edward Troyanowski, I believe was his name, a Russian fighter who was known for beating an undefeated Argentine fighter, I believe, at the time, but then ended up getting knocked out by this random African fighter with one of his mandatories. He was never heard from again. Julius Ndongo then beats an older Ricky Burns overall, who in my opinion never was an A-grade fighter to begin with. That's who Terrence Crawford beat it overall to become unified at the 140-pound division. Are any of those fighters greater than a Billy Joe Saunders, greater than or more talented than a Callum Smith, a Billy Joe Saunders, or a Caleb Plant? Absolutely not. It is what it is. Now let's talk about Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor, in my opinion, you can debate, unified the most talented out of all of them because he beat Regis Prograis, beat Jose Ramirez, you know, beat Victor Postal, all those guys. You can debate that all those guys are at least on the A- level. I would not debate that any of those guys are A or A+ fighters, but they're all at least on the A- level. When you talk about Alexander Usyk, I believe that he beat Glowacki. That was his first unification fight. That was a dude that at least was decently talented. You know, whether you want to argue him on an A- level or not. I believe that he also beat, who else did he beat in that division? I can't remember all the champions, but he beat Murat Gassiev, who I would at least say was on the A- level within that division. You can also, you know, talk about Michael Hunter, who at least is a decent A fighter. I wouldn't call him A+, but you can call him as an A to A- fighter. You're also talking about a dude that beat Tony Bellew, who was decent at the time. And you're also talking about a dude that beat Marco Huck. Bottom line is this. Alexander Usyk beat every single tough competitor. And then later on would beat Anthony Joshua. So Dante's Boxing Nation can talk all this shit all he wants to. About how Terrence Crawford has fought the best. He's fought this. The biggest win of his career is a Sean Porter that already had 3 losses in his career. And on top of that had no belt at the time. How can you be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter when that is your best win? It ain't possible. It is what it is. Don't get me wrong. I respect Terrence Crawford with overall, you know, all my soul, all my heart, mind, and soul. I think that Terrence Bud Crawford is a fantastic fighter. And do I think that if he gets that win over Errol Spence Jr., that he could surpass Canelo as the #1 fighter? Absolutely. At least he'll be in that class. But don't sit here and tell me that Terrence Bud Crawford, that he's a #1 pound-for-pound fighter because he unified 140 and he was able to beat Sean Porter. I don't give a shit what anyone says. And if your point is about, well, Terrence Crawford allegedly goes after anybody, we can allege that with a certain amount of fighters. We can allege that overall with a lot of fighters. We can allege that with Guillermo Rigondeaux. But Guillermo Rigondeaux can't be in the top 10 pound-for-pound now, can he? It just is what it is. So you have to be very careful with that. That's why when we rank things, it has to be results-orientated. It can't be overall what-ifs. Like I said, if your arguments are ifs, ands, and buts, you have no argument. It's hypothetical. And a hypothetical argument is never going to trump over a factual argument. All right? Is what it is. And the facts is that Saul Canelo Alvarez has way bigger wins in his career than what a Terrence Crawford ever has. Is what it is.
Crawford is going after Errol Spence. He's been going after him for quite some time now. And you would never hear me say Terrence Crawford can fight whoever he wants. You would never hear me say anything like that. Because Crawford is always going after the best. Mark my words, if this Canelo versus Makabu fight goes down, Makabu, he will not make it past 3 rounds. This will be one of Canelo Alvarez's easiest fights. Speaking of Canelo Alvarez's easiest fights, I did a poll and I asked you guys, would this Makabu fight be Canelo's easiest, one of his easiest, or one of his toughest fights?
Right, but let me ask you this when it comes down to it. If Terrence Bud Crawford were to face Josh Taylor next, do we predict that it would be one of his easiest fights, or do we predict that it would be one of his toughest fights? Now, some people may say that it will be one of his toughest fights. Listen, I respect Josh Taylor I have a lot of respect for him. I think that he's a decently talented and skilled fighter. I don't think that Josh Taylor has a chance to beat Terrence Bud Crawford. I think that he has about a 20% chance to beat Terrence Bud Crawford. I think that Josh Taylor is a highly skilled fighter. But just like when it came to Ricky Hatton versus Floyd Mayweather Jr., Ricky was a decently great fighter, but he wasn't on that Floyd Mayweather Jr. level. Shit, Ricky Hatton, to be quite honest with you, he wasn't even on the Miguel Cotto or Juan Manuel Marquez level. So it is what it is. It just, it's whatever. So at the end of the day, I think Josh Taylor is a great fighter. But we can put this poll out here and say, how much of a chance do you really give Josh Taylor? We can put this poll, all the living long damn day. At the end of the day, just because a fight overall is going to end up easier for a fighter doesn't always mean that they're facing bad competition. Sometimes that just means that they're on a whole nother level. Now, in my opinion, is Olunga Makabu, once again, is he an A-grade fighter? No, he's not. But at the end of the day, like I said, he's at least decent. I wouldn't call him an all-time great fighter. I wouldn't call him a great fighter, but I would at least say that he's good for the division. And overall, for a first cruiserweight fight, I don't think that it's that bad of a fight.
And there's your answer right there on the screen. This means Canelo, he's not fooling anyone. And neither are the Mexican fans that voted this would be Canelo's toughest fight. You see, I noticed that they will always do this.
No, it's not going to be his toughest fight, but it's an interesting matchup. Once again, I understand why it's happening. That's why I don't have a problem with the fight. Once again, it's different if you're a Mikey Garcia and you're slithering in and out of the weight divisions, or a Gervonta Tank Davis, and you're usually facing with some of the weaker links there. But Canelo Alvarez is not usually doing that. Now some may say, well, what are you talking about? Olunga Makabu, he is the weakest link there, or he is the weakest champion. And that's fair. But, like I said, when it comes down to it, it's at least an interesting fight overall for the first fight at 200 pounds. If that fight is going to constitute there. That's why overall Gervonta Tank Davis, even though I didn't think that the Mario Barrios fight was an A-grade fight, I thought I would give him a break, because if that was going to be his first 140 fight, it wasn't a great fight, but it wasn't a bad fight either. But now if you face someone again at, 140 pounds, you're going to have to face one of the big contenders there. It doesn't have to be Josh Taylor right off the bat, but you should face someone maybe like a Victor Postol or Regis Prograis or Jose Ramirez at least. Jose Zepeda maybe, even one of those guys at least. And Gervonta has not called out any of those guys. And then he returns to 135, and who does he face next? He was supposed to face Rolly Romero, who no one looks at as a top contending fighter when it comes down to it. A dude with a C-grade skill set. And then he gets replaced with Isaac Cruz, who's a very tough competitor, but he's not an A-grade fighter. So like I said, people can talk shit overall about Saul Canelo Alvarez all the living long damn day, but he is not a Gervonta Tank Davis. He's not a Mikey Garcia. He is not slithering in and out of the weight divisions and being protected like those fighters. Now, if you want to say that there are certain fights that you would love to see that have not happened yet, that's completely fair to say. But to say that Canelo, all in all, that he does not fight some of the best fighters out there, that would be just ludicrous.
And polls, whenever I do a poll and it involves Canelo Alvarez, regardless what the correct answer is, they will always pick whatever favors Canelo. But the problem with doing that, especially in this poll right here, is you're going to be proven right or wrong. Because if this fight ends the same way the Rocky Fielding fight ended, the same way the Yildirim fight ended, then that proves...
Just because someone has a poll doesn't mean overall that people are right. I could post a poll on my channel and I could post a question. Hey, who do you guys personally believe is greater, Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Roberto Duran? And who the hell knows? There could be 75% of people overall that say that Roberto Duran is the greatest fighter. Does that mean overall that that is the correct decision? No, it doesn't. You know, it just is what it is. You know, just because a bunch of people overall say 2 + 2 = 5 doesn't mean that it's the right answer. You know, it is what it is.
That we were all right, that this is going to be.
Now, I understand what Dante is saying at the end of the day, but what I will say is this, you know, at the same time, you know, you do have to pay attention to a certain amount of people's reactions, and sometimes you don't. I don't think that you have to follow what people say religiously, because most people are sheep, and I don't think that they have the intelligence, usually, to, you know, the majority of people anyway, I don't think that they usually have the right amount of intelligence to break things down objectively and logically. But when you take a look at it, at the end of the day, like say, when you take a look at boxing, people know overall that Canelo is at least taking on decent challenges. And the reason why I know that is because, once again, take a look at his pay-per-view numbers. Once again, I reviewed a couple videos where Boxing Ego and Dante's Boxing Nation and all these guys, they were bitch, moaning, and crying overall about, you know, how people were attacking Gervonta Tank Davis's numbers. Well, you attack Canelo Alvarez's numbers, but you can't really attack Canelo Alvarez's numbers in his last fight because he did 900,000 pay-per-view buys. What did Gervonta Tank Davis do in his last fight? We don't know because they won't release the pay-per-view numbers. And that is a signal that Gervonta Tank Davis is not facing the best of fighters. Because no one is going to buy a fight, all in all, that is not decently competitive or looked at as decently competitive. Not only that, but do I think Canelo is a decently bigger star, at least at the current moment in time? Yes, but like I said, it doesn't matter, because if people don't look at a fight that's decently competitive, unless they have a very big fan base, they're not going to buy that fight. You know, it is what it is.
One of Canelo's easiest fights, if not his easiest one. Speaking of that, this is why it sounds ridiculous when Canelo fans try to compare who Canelo is fighting to who Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting. I actually called this, guys.
You actually can't compare who they're fighting at all, because Canelo Alvarez is facing such greater competition, it's really not even close. And I know a certain amount of people are going to say, oh, well, how can you say that? Mr. Isaac Cruz and Mario Barrios, you know, they're more talented than some of the fighters that Canelo's fight. No, they're not. Isaac Cruz and Mario Barrios are two fighters that have never won an official belt in their boxing career. Never. And this is the generation where there's 4 official belts in each division. They have never won any of the official belts in any of the weight divisions. Billy Joe Saunders is a 2-weight division champion. Callum Smith was the Super WBA, Super Middleweight champion, I believe. And on top of that, the Ring Magazine champion. The Ring Magazine champion. Caleb Plant beat a decent fighter in Jose Uzcategui, who was coming off of a very decent knockout, I believe, over one of the Durrell brothers when it came down to it. Sorry for popping that up. But when it comes down to it, and then on top of that, he got in a fight with Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant was able to beat him about 8 rounds to 4. So at the end of the day, like I said, people can bitch, moan, and complain about Canelo Alvarez's competition all they want to. But at the end of the day, he is facing, on average, A-grade fighters.
Before it happened, I told you guys that I truly believe that Gervonta Tank Davis, he had the toughest opponent, but Devin Haney, he had the biggest name opponent out of the 3. And I also told you guys, before it happened, that Teofimo Lopez...
If Gervonta Tank Davis had the toughest opponent out of all the fighters of their last fights, I'm not talking about Mr. Lunga Makabu. And to be honest with you, I think that this Canelo Makabu fight, I think that that fight, if it's on pay-per-view, let's say, I think that that fight is going to get more views than even the Gervonta Tank Davis Isaac Cruz fight. You know why? Because no one wants to see Isaac Cruz versus Gervonta Tank Davis. No one wants to see, and I have certain people sometimes that come in my comment section and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, Canelo don't fight the best. He don't fight this. Listen, everything that I say, you know, overall, some of it can be opinionated. But at the end of the day, a lot of it also is factual. You can get mad at it. You can not get mad at it. But at the end of the day, answer me this question if you believe that Canelo Alvarez is one of these guys that just faces the weakest opposition and Gervonta Tank Davis was facing an alleged tougher opponent in Mr. Isaac Cruz. Answer me this question. Not only why did Canelo Alvarez has way more better pay-per-view numbers than Gervonta Tank Davis in his last fight, but on top of that, even if we don't want to compare it like that, because Mr. Canelo Alvarez has been in boxing longer, he's a Mexican superstar, he's been in bigger fights when it comes down to it, even if you don't want to just compare it like that. Because some would say that that's a stupid comparison, and I would get it. Why did Gervonta Tank Davis's pay-per-view numbers, even compared to his last fight with Mario Barrios, drop overall so overall exceedingly? Why overall had the pay-per-view numbers not been released? Why overall is there rumors of the pay-per-view not even doing 100,000 pay-per-view buys, but his fight with Mario Barrios, I believe, did about 400,000 to 450,000 pay-per-view buys, which is pretty decent for at the point Gervonta Tank Davis is in his career. You know why that is? Because no one wants to see Gervonta Tank Davis versus these guys. No one wants to see Gervonta Tank Davis versus Isaac Cruz. You know, there is some people that want to see Gervonta Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero. I'm not personally one of those people because Rolly Romero is not an A-grade fighter. I don't even think he would beat Ryan Garcia. I don't even know if he'd beat Isaac Cruz. It is what it is.
Alvarez was either going to lose to George Kambosos or he was going to struggle really bad against him. My point is, Gervonta is the one that had the toughest fight. You can't include T.O. because that was a cherry pick gone wrong. So if we're comparing...
George Kambosos is a better fighter than Isaac Cruz. Just stop.
The level of opposition.
And listen, I'm not this Teofimo Lopez fanboy or anything like that. But come on, man. You're going to really say that Isaac Cruz, a person who was never a champion. Now, there's certain people overall that maybe have never won a title or don't have a title at the current moment that could be counted as very, very great fighters or good fighters. You know, I can't really think of any off the top of my head at the moment. But, you know, like maybe a Jerome Boutsenis. Like Jerome Boutsenis, in my opinion, he looks, you know, more talented than that of a Yordenis Ugas. But, you know, at the end of the day, like I said, Isaac Cruz and Mario Barrios and these guys, they're not on that level, man. Just stop.
When it comes to Canelo versus Gervonta Tank Davis, then that means that Canelo, he should be involved in a really, really tough fight, just like Gervonta was against Cruz. This is how the Canelo Mac...
So how do you know overall that just because someone is in a tough fight, that means all in all that they're facing decent opposition? Floyd Mayweather Jr., you know how many fights that I've seen in his career where he dominated his opponent? He beat Manny Pacquiao, in my opinion, either 8 rounds to 4 or 9 rounds to 3. Does that mean that he was facing weak opposition because he dominated? Oh, well, we all know Manny Pacquiao, that he wasn't what he was propped up to be, or he fought Manny Pacquiao at a weak point in his career because, you know, that fight wasn't even competitive. That's not how fights work. That's not how fights work. But because Dante is such an idiot when it comes down to it, that's how he looks at things.
The fight should look, right? It shouldn't look like the Rocky Fielding fight. It shouldn't look like the Yildirim fight, right? But it will look like that. Because unlike Isaac Cruz, Makabu...
I believe that Saul Canelo Alvarez more than likely probably will stop in Ilunga Makabu. But I believe that it's going to be around probably the 8th round. Because Makabu, like I said, Canelo, he's going to have to be careful. Because that dude can really punch.
He has no chin. He has no defense.
You know, someone that doesn't have a chin was an Amir Khan or a Kell Brook by the time that Terrence Bud Crawford fought him. But this dude was, once again, he'll basically give Terrence Bud Crawford full credit for that. Ain't that a bitch? Like, that makes no sense.
He has no technique. He has no speed. All he has is a belt. And it's so ironic because while Canelo Alvarez refuses to fight the best...
Once again, like I said, I don't think that Ilunga Makabu is Fighter of the Year. But like I said... What he is he's at least a decent fighter. He's a decent fighter. He's not a great fighter. But if you don't believe me, go ahead and check out his highlights. You know, he did defeat some of the undefeated upcoming prospects in Cruiserweight. It's not like this dude is just coming in here to lay down. I think that this dude, let me say this, I thought when Canelo fought Rocky Fielding, I thought that was a complete useless fight because I thought Rocky Fielding was a complete chump. But Makabu, I don't think that he's on the same caliber as Rocky Fielding. I think that he's at least a level above Rocky Fielding because Rocky Fielding did not really have elite athleticism compared to a Canelo. He really had no power to threaten him with, and he really had no boxing skills. Makabu, in my opinion, not only can he really punch, but when it comes down to it, he at least has some sort of boxing skills, and on top of that, he's going to be a decent amount bigger than Canelo. He's even going to be bigger than what Rocky Fielding or what Callum Smith were, just in terms of weight.
Mexican fighters and the best black fighters, Gervonta Tank Davis, a black American, he's facing all of the best Mexican competition.
No, he's not. I don't understand this narrative. Isaac Cruz is not even the best Mexican fighter at 135. I don't even think he's better than Ryan Garcia. Shit, I don't even know if 100% Isaac Cruz would beat Jojo Diaz. I mean, maybe he would beat Jojo Diaz just because Jojo Diaz, he don't throw that much. But, you know, I don't even know if he's the best Mexican there. I think personally that is Ryan Garcia. And I don't think Ryan Garcia is an A-grade fighter necessarily, but it just is what it is. You know, he didn't even face, shit, he didn't even face the second best Mexican at 140. So it is what it is, at least, you know, proven.
in 3 different weight classes, right? So the question is, if Gervonta can fight all of the best Mexican fighters available, from ones...
But he's not fighting all the best Mexican fighters available. I don't get this narrative. It's like Dante has to be lying about some of these narratives. He just has to be, because it's like there's no way someone can really be that stupid. There's just no way. Like, it's just impossible. I don't see all in all how you can be literally that delusional.
At higher weight classes, undefeated, to former multiple champions, etc., etc., how come Canelo Alvarez isn't willing to do the same?
This dude just said former champions. What former champions, besides Leo Santa Cruz and Jose Pedraza, has Gervonta Tank Davis really fought? And I'm not counting Mario Barrios, because a regular title is not a real deal title. I'm not counting that. It is what it is. If you do not have one of the official belts or one of the super belts overall, like what a Terrence Bud Crawford had, I believe, at 140, and what a Canelo had recently, I believe, at this weight division, if you don't have one of those belts, it's not one of the official belts. So just stop. Gervonta Tank Davis has a win over 2 champions that are at a decent point in their career. I'm talking about legitimate champions. One was Leo Santa Cruz, and the other one, I believe, was Jose Pedraza. My bad. Yuriorkis Gamboa, I mean, you know, he was a former champion, but I mean, shit, that was like when Canelo Alvarez beat Shane Mosley. Shane Mosley was basically a prop at that point in time in his career. It was the same thing with Yuriorkis Gamboa.
How come he won't go after all of the best black fighters? Listen, we already know this. Black versus anyone that's not black is one of the biggest rivalries. But black versus Mexico in particular, that is the biggest boxing rivalry, and the numbers will back that up. This is the reason why Floyd Mayweather beat Mexicans on their own holidays constantly. And this is the reason why Gervonta Tank Davis is doing the same things today.
Right, but he's not doing the same things as Floyd Mayweather Jr. It just is what it is. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, he may be fighting, certain people on similar holidays, right around the, in the, Mexican independent, whatever the Mexican holidays are when it comes down to it. But, Cinco de Mayo or stuff like that. He may be, facing, them around the same time, but he's not facing the same level of opposition. Like Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought Juan Manuel Marquez, Genaro Hernandez, what the hell is his name? So, not just Canelo Alvarez, but there was a couple of others that I believe that he fought that were very, very decent. Like A-grade fighters, pound-for-pound fighters. Gervonta Tank Davis is not even fighting the best Mexican within his own division.
Because at the end of the day...
Shit, he hasn't even fought the best 2 Mexican fighters at 130.
Mexicans aren't rooting for black fighters, so it would make no sense.
Well, I would agree with that, but what makes you think all in all that that the black demographic is rooting for Latino fighters? Once again, Dante always tries to bring up this point about, how, the black fan base and black fighters are so magnanimous. No, they're not. It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind if you're a person, no matter what demographic you are, and you're cheering for your own demographic, and even if you don't cheer for anyone else. No problem with that whatsoever. But don't sit here and lie all in all and just basically say that one demographic is so magnanimous compared to everyone else. That's bullshit. Because we all know, once again, not only are you, for a very specific reason, tearing down, Canelo Alvarez being the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, but when Vasily Lomachenko was, you tried to tear him down. You tried to tear down Tyson Fury. You tried to tear down Alexander Usyk. You tried to tear down a lot of these fighters that are especially a threat to the top 5 pound-for-pound. So just knock it off.
For the 2 hated guys to be the first to fight against each other. It would make more sense for a black guy to fight the guy that the majority of the racist fans will support. Just like 99% of the non-black...
And that basically is Dante's excuse for saying, well, just in case Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo don't fight each other, it would make more sense for them to face off with Canelo Alvarez. Because he'll get after Canelo for not facing them. But if Andrade or Jermall Charlo turn down a fight, he's not going to get after him. It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. I think that Canelo should go after those guys as well. Excuse me. But if you're going to go after Canelo Alvarez for that, if Jermall Charlo does turn down a fight like he already turned down David Benavidez and Demetrius Andrade, you should get after him as well. And we already know that Dante's Boxing Nation, he's never had anywhere near the same energy with those fighters that he has had with Canelo Alvarez.
Population in America, rooted against Floyd Mayweather when he fought Manny Pacquiao. Same thing when...
I would somewhat agree with that. And like I said, are there a certain amount of the demographics, other demographics that will root against black fighters or black athletes? Certainly. No doubt about it. I don't have a problem with saying that. But at the end of the day, once again, this is the problem with Dante's Boxing Nation and other channels like Boxing Eagle and Aki TV especially. You know, they're too victimized. They're too much of a victim mentality pro-black cult. And that's the big part of the reason why they make videos like these, because they don't have the intelligence overall to realize different types of things. They just don't have that type of intelligence. They have very, very, very low intelligence when it comes down to, at least to a certain degree. They may have high intelligence in certain things, and I think it's a great thing that they have their own platform. But when it comes to real, serious, logical, and objective conversations, they don't have that ability. They don't have that ability because they don't understand the differences and the idiosyncrasies overall when it comes to certain things and maybe why certain people may be ranked. The only thing that they can see is, wow, you have a Saul Canelo Alvarez, you have a Vasyl Lomachenko. They're ranked very highly because they're trying to tear down black fighters. Not every single fighter that is of a different demographic that is ranked highly is just up there because they're trying to rank them above black fighters. Is that a part of it? It could be a part of it, but that's not always the whole entire thing. Now, if you're talking about trying to, you know, like I said, put a Naiwa Inoue, you know, someone who is, you know, they're really trying to put him up high because he's of the Asian demographic and they want to get the Asians, you know, dollars when it comes down to it, or they want to attract that fan base. You know, that makes sense at the end of the day, because if you put Naiwa Inoue over Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr., for example, you can't do that because Naiwa Inoue, even though he's a three-weight division champion and he's a decent boxer, who has he really fought? So if you're going to say the things that Terrence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., that they can't be above Canelo because they don't have the resume, that's 100% okay. But then at the same time, you would have to say that Mr., you know, probably I'm not going to say Josh Taylor because Josh Taylor at least has a decent resume for his division. But let's say like a Naiwa Inoue, like I said. Who has he really fought overall that has been definitively A grade? So that's a person all in all that you can tell if they were to rank it like that, maybe they would have a little bit of a racial issue. But it is not just a racial issue just because Saul Canelo Alvarez or Vasyl Lomachenko are ranked high on the pound-for-pound list. Because you can tell that both of those guys are real-deal fighters, especially Saul Canelo Alvarez.
The American...
And Saul Canelo Alvarez has been on a dominant stretch for the past several years.
Andre Ward, when he fought against a racist Sergey Kovalev. Or when any black American fights against a Golovkin or a Canelo Alvarez. This is the reason why it makes no sense for two black fighters to be fighting against each other first.
That's basically an excuse. It is what it is.
Now, when all the smoke is cleared and both of these black fighters have eliminated all of these other fighters, that's when it makes sense for those two black fighters to fight against each other.
Right, but Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, they have not even showed interest in David Benavidez. Don't get me wrong, do I think Demetrius Andrade overall, you know, do I think that he has been ducked by certain fighters? Sure, I don't think that there's any doubt about that. He's a very tricky style, I get it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to get on Canelo Alvarez's ass for not facing certain fights, or it seems like he's maneuvering, you better get on that ass for Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade. But instead, what does Dante's Boxing Nation do? It doesn't make sense for two black fighters to face each other. Of course it does, when it comes down to it. Of course it does. It would do a great amount of money, would it not? So would that not trap Canelo Alvarez more in a corner if you do believe that he is truly avoiding those fighters? So of course it would make sense for that fight to happen.
Like the Errol Spence Crawford situation. That's why it's time for that fight to happen now. Because
it's time for that fight to happen now because those are the only two guys left in the welterweight division. And that fight could have happened, you know, even many times ago. But the reason why that fight needs to happen now is because it's the biggest fight available. David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, and Demetrius Andrade, they're all big fights when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, they're pretty much all on the same level. It just is what it is. But in my opinion, the biggest fights out there actually for Canelo, even though they may not get as much of an attraction as a David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo fight, because those are probably the two most popular fighters that Canelo could fight, at least in terms of within those weight classes. But I believe in terms of the most challenging and in terms of the best for history, I believe that Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, those are the two best fights for him, at least remaining right now. Then after that, of course, David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo, and Demetrius Andrade.
There's no other fight that is bigger than that. Matter of fact, that's the biggest fight in boxing history right now.
Did you say boxing history? I think you mean boxing today, but I get what you mean.
Guys have to remember the reason why we had Sugar Ray Leonard versus Tommy Hearns and Hagler is because they were the best there. There weren't any other guys around, so it wasn't like they were just selecting each other as opponents. They were the two best at the time when Sugar Ray Leonard, when he fought Hearns. Remember, before he fought Hearns, he had to avenge his loss to Roberto Duran when he made Duran quit. And let me tell you another reason why that comparison, Canelo to Gervonta Tank Davis, is such a flawed comparison. Because no one is calling Gervonta...
It's a flawed comparison because Gervonta Tank Davis doesn't compare to Saul Canelo Alvarez at all.
Tank Davis, pound for pound, the best fighter in the world. You've never even heard me mention his name on a pound for pound list. Certainly not the top 5. I mean, that's...
You've mentioned him on the top 10 pound for pound list. Just stop. Yes, you have. Yes, you have. And not only have certain channels overall said that he's one of the top pound for pound fighters, I'm not saying that Dante has alleged that he's the #1 pound for pound fighter. But he's also said that Canelo was not on Gervonta Tank Davis's level. You can see it in my videos. He said that Canelo's not on the level of Stephen Fulton. He said that he's not on the level of a certain amount of these fighters. And we all know that's a bunch of horse shit.
It's like comparing Canelo Alvarez to Jaron Ennis. If you want an equal comparison, you compare Canelo Alvarez to Terrence Crawford, the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. And
why would you compare Saul Canelo Alvarez to Terrence Bud Crawford? I thought you said that Saul Canelo Alvarez, that early on in your videos, that he's not even on some of the other black fighters' levels that haven't even accomplished what a Terrence Bud Crawford has fought or has got. So once again, like I said, and I've been correct on this 100% of the way, Dante overall knows that Canelo is on a different level. He can spread you this bullshit all he wants to, but he knows.
Is Terrence Crawford always attempting to do? The complete opposite of what Canelo is always trying to do. Crawford is always going after the best competition. He's always chasing them. He is the...
Right, so when Terrence Bud Crawford gets 10 A-grade wins debatably in his career, like Austin Trout, Danny Jacobs, Arasani Lara, Sergey Kovalev, Miguel Cotto, Gennady Golovkin, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, you let me know when that happens. Because as of right now, Terrence Bud Crawford maybe at most has 3 A-grade wins in his career. And to be quite honest with you, there's only one definitive A-grade fight in his career. And that's Shawn Porter. The rest of them are pretty much B and C class fights. It is what it is.
Most avoided. That additional background music you guys are hearing, that's from my daughter playing in the background. But anyway, listen. We already know. If Crawford was in Canelo's shoes right now, we all know Crawford would have fought David Benavidez a long time ago. We know this. We know that Crawford would have fought Andrade and Charlo. We know that he would have fought them all. Because soon as Crawford...
Would he have fought them? Or overall, would he have signed with Top Rank and fought the B and C class welterweights? Or fought the B and C class super middleweights who weren't even champions? Why do you think that Errol Spence Jr. is going to probably have 3 out of the 4 belts for the welterweight division and Terrence Crawford only has 1? Why do you think that is? And I'm not saying that Terrence is not interested in some of the big fights, but it's obvious that Terrence Crawford, just in terms of the business side of boxing, the man ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
Welterweight, he wanted to fight the boogeyman Errol Spence. Guys, Terrence Crawford was in the exact same situation that Canelo Alvarez was in when Jamal Charlo was Canelo's mandatory. Canelo decided to vacate his belt, surrender his belt, give it to Charlo. And what did Crawford do? Crawford, who had Porter as his mandatory, and remember guys, before Crawford decided to fight Porter, everyone said he was ducking Porter. Everyone said he was ducking Porter.
Because he said overall that he wasn't interested in a fight with Shawn Porter, even though he had no other options available. And what did you say? You basically made excuses for him. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad that fight happened. It's a great win that Terrence Crawford got over Shawn Porter. But, you know, just because he has a win over Shawn Porter, can I completely compare that to the career of Canelo? Absolutely not. Like I said, Canelo has beaten the likes of Lara, Golovkin, Austin Trout, Cotto, Sergey. I mean, we already know all the names. Shawn Porter is a great fighter, but he's an A- fighter. He's lost almost every big fight in his career. We already know the level of Shawn Porter. He is an A-grade fighter. Don't get me wrong. He is an A-grade fighter. But barely.
Crawford didn't give up his belt, right? He took the fight and he stopped Shawn Porter. That's the difference from a Canelo Alvarez and a Terrence Crawford. Crawford has never vacated his belt. certainly not for a tough contender. Now understand this, guys. There's only one condition where it makes sense to vacate your belt. That's if your mandatory is a complete tomato can. Some guy we don't know how he got there. He has like 3 or 4 losses, and he's your mandatory, right? And you have an option to either fight him, or you could take this big dangerous fight that everyone wants to see you involved in.
So basically, that's somewhat of a similar situation that Tyson Fury has with Dillian White. Now, Dillian White, I don't think that he's a bum. I don't think that he's a tomato can. He's a very decently great fighter. But Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua, in my opinion, clearly are the bigger fights. And what did Dante say? Well, if Tyson Fury vacates his title, that'll show that he's scared of Dillian White. So once again, Dante, like I said, he does not hold the same standards for everybody.
So you say, forget it. I'm going to vacate that belt, and I'm going to take the super fight. That's happened before in the past. But see, what Canelo does is he will vacate his belt to avoid the dangerous super fight and then fight a no-name like Rocky Fielding, a soft touch who had just came off of a knockout loss.
Yes, Rocky Fielding is a soft touch, but Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, and Callum Smith, none of those fighters are soft touches. Like I said, you can say whatever you want about Canelo Alvarez at the end of the day, but he has fought consistent, good competition.
I keep hearing Mexican fans say, man, he can fight whoever he wants, man. He fought Trout, he fought Mayweather, he fought Golovkin, etc., right? Those are things you say when a fighter is retired. Not when...
Well, I agree, since Canelo Alvarez is still active, he has the duty to face the best fighters out there. But like I said, I can't get after Canelo Alvarez that much. If instead of facing Charlo or Andre or Benavidez, he's facing Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, and Callum Smith. All those fighters, like I said, they're pretty much on a very similar level in my opinion anyway. Some of them are multiple weight division champions. Some of them are just one weight class champions. I think all of them are around the A- level. It just is what it is.
He's in his prime, and everyone else is...
Let me say this, and I still stick by this. In my opinion, a prime Billy Joe Saunders is a tougher fight for Canelo than what a Jamal Charlo is. It's no offense against Charlo. I think that Charlo is a very decent fighter. But Charlo, he's just too stiff. He's too stiff. He doesn't have that decent amount of head movement. He does not have that quick a feet. He gets countered and hit way too easily. He has way too many flaws.
Trying to fight.
That does not mean that I would not like to see the fight. But like I said, Canelo is taking fights that are somewhat on that same level.
The best. Like once again, Terrence Crawford wanting to fight Errol Spence. Like everyone at light heavyweight wanting to fight against each other, right? Gilberto Ramirez, he wants Bivol. Bivol, he wants Better Biev. Better Biev wants Canelo. He wants the rest of them, right? Anthony Yard, he's about to fight Joe Smith. Everyone is fighting the best.
Actually, I believe that Canelo is going to face Joe Smith. Now he just said that Anthony Yard's about to fight Joe Smith. So what did he say there? That's a great fight. That's what he said.
If Canelo Alvarez does not get in the ring and beat a Bivol, a Better Biev, a Joe Smith, an Andrade...
So that's exactly what Dante just said. So he should have no problem if Canelo Alvarez is going to go after Joe Smith next. He should have no problem with that whatsoever. We should hear no excuses. It should be a 100% A-grade fight. And I don't even think it is an A-grade fight. I think that it's about a B+ fight, or maybe A- fight, because Joe Smith Jr., in my opinion, I don't think that he has enough overall to beat Canelo, but it's at least interesting because Joe Smith is one of the champions there, and he has an A-grade amount of power.
Carlo, Benavidez, Gilberto Ramirez, even a David Morrell. Not right now. But trust me, in another year, David Morrell is going to be a major player at 168.
He certainly could be. David Morrell, I think, is very decently talented.
And Jamal Charlo. If Canelo Alvarez doesn't get in the ring with one of these guys and beat them without controversy, his entire career is going to look like a joke. Because...
If Canelo Alvarez retired today, his career would not look like a joke. You cannot defeat champion after champion and your career look like a joke. What's a joke overall is your analysis.
Those fights that you guys like to mention, all of those names, when you say, oh man, he fought Shane Mosley, he fought Golovkin, Lara, Mayweather. the majority of those fights he lost.
Actually, no, he didn't. He won. It is what it is. He sure he lost to Mayweather. The Lara one, someone debate is a bit controversial, but at the end of the day, you can argue that maybe Arasani Lara, that he could have threw more. It just is what it is. The first Golovkin fight, of course, I thought Canelo lost, but in the rematch, Canelo Alvarez delivered, and he clearly won. So it is what it is.
Everyone believes he lost to Lara and Gennady Golovkin. So you can't even include...
And ain't that a bitch now that apparently that Dante always says that, you know, everyone thinks that Canelo Alvarez lost to Gennady Golovkin, but before he was saying that Gennady Golovkin was this big hype job. You know, the reason why he doesn't say that about Gennady Golovkin anymore is because there's no reason to tear him down as much anymore because he's not as big of a threat. Canelo was the main threat.
Those wins, when it comes to his best wins of his career, you would have to dummy it down a little bit, and you would have to look at wins like the Caleb Smith fight or the Plant fight, right? Then those becomes like his biggest wins. Every single time.
Canelo's biggest wins in his career are over Arasani Lara, Gennady Golovkin, and a few others. It just is what it is. Danny Jacobs is another one. Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Sergey Kovalev. All these ones, usually he definitively won. There was a bit of controversy with the Arasani Lara fight. There was a bit of controversy, of course, with the first Gennady Golovkin fight. But at the end of the day, Canelo pulled out of it. So it is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez stepped up in competition. He dropped the ball. He has never beat a top-level opponent that put him in a 50-50 fight. He's never won a fight like that without controversy.
He won it against Gennady Golovkin in the rematch. Try again.
If you fans want him to be like Mayweather so much, since you guys always say he's just trying to be like Mayweather, well, he better get some of those type of...
And that is the problem with Dante's Boxing Nation. He realizes that, just like I do, there's going to be a certain amount of push for Canelo to be over Mayweather at the end of his career. Do I think that he ever will be? Like I said, not definitively. But when it comes down to the overall bottom line is this. Canelo could eventually get at least to the top 10 level.
Mayweather wins.
And Jamal Charlo, in my opinion, Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, David Benavidez, those are all great fights. Don't get me wrong. They're not Gennady Golovkin and Arasani Lara level fights. They're not on that level. They're just not. Those fights at the time were 50-50 fights. No one takes a look at Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez and says, wow, if Canelo faces those guys, that's a 50-50 fight. No one who has a logical and sound mind thinks that. The only 50-50 fights that are available for Canelo right now are Dimitri Bivol and Artur Beterbiev.
He better get some of those big wins where Mayweather was fighting against strong, hard punchers that were 15, 20 pounds bigger than him, and he was beating them without controversy.
You know, people always say that Mayweather was usually beating very, big guys who were 15 pounds heavier than him. Who specifically? I want to know who these fighters are. Besides Victor Ortiz, besides Oscar De La Hoya, who in his career did he fight that was 20 pounds bigger? Was it Shane Mosley? We all know that's not it. Was it Miguel Cotto? We all know he's not 20 pounds bigger. Was it Ricky Hatton or Manny Pacquiao? We all know it wasn't them. Was it Jose Luis Castillo? We all know it wasn't him. Was it Carlos Baldomir, Zab Judah, DeMarcus Chop Corley, Nadal? It's none of these fighters. There was only 2 fighters, maybe 3 in his career, that were about maybe 20 pounds bigger than him. And I congratulate Floyd overall for, getting those victories. But like I said, come on, man. Like, these guys, they always try to give you this bullshit about how Floyd always fought fighters that were 20 pounds bigger. No, he didn't. Don't get me wrong. There were certain fighters that were bigger than him. And just because Floyd was that skilled, he, usually beat the bigger guys. But they were usually about 10 to 13 pounds bigger.
Beat Manny Pacquiao when Pacquiao was considered number 2. Pound for pound, the best fighter in the world. He beat him with no controversy. That's the same pound for pound list that you guys put Canelo Alvarez on today. Canelo Alvarez lost to an old-ass Floyd Mayweather that was way smaller than him.
He didn't lose to an old-ass Floyd Mayweather. He lost to a 36-year-old Mayweather. Listen, at the end of the day, I congratulate Floyd for the win. But it was a great version of Floyd Mayweather. He still is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. These people are trying to act like Floyd Mayweather Jr. was like in hospice care or something. Like overall, he was at like the old folks home. Dude, he was 36 years old. Shit, he beat Manny Pacquiao in that alleged 50-50 fight. Manny Pacquiao was 36 years old, so what are you saying? That Floyd Mayweather, even though he was still older at the time, that he doesn't deserve Manny Pacquiao, he doesn't deserve credit for that win because they were both too old by the time they fought each other? Come on, that just doesn't make sense. It would make sense if he was someone like a Sugar Ray Leonard when he was like 36 years old, I believe. He wasn't shit at that point in time in his career. That would make sense, but he wasn't. He was a number one pound-for-pound fighter. It's like Michael Jordan, when he was 36 years old, I believe, in the NBA. People say, well, that's like me saying, like, well, you know what? Karl Malone, he wasn't shit, and John Stockton and the Utah Jazz, they weren't shit because they lost to a 36-year-old version of Michael Jordan. The 36-year-old version of Michael Jordan still was the best NBA player overall in all of basketball, at least during that time. So it just is what it is.
18 to 20 pounds smaller than him. Completely beat the brakes off of Canelo Alvarez. Stood in the center of the ring with the much bigger, younger, stronger Canelo. Even managed to back him up at times in the fight. Boy, I know that hurt your feelings hearing that.
Yes, absolutely. Overall, he did. Like I said, the reason why I think Floyd was able to beat Canelo is because I just think Floyd, kind of like in the Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua fight, Floyd just has faster feet, and all in all, I just think he's the all-around faster fighter and, slightly more skilled fighter. Some may even say, well, they're in completely different leagues. I think that they're around somewhat similar just in terms of their weight classes. But the difference, I think, is that Floyd not only do I think is more skilled than that of a Canelo, he's probably a level above him, just in terms of all-around skills. But Floyd Mayweather Jr. has faster feet, he has faster hands, he's lighter, he can be speedier around the ring. So if they're both trying to outbox each other, the smaller guy is going to win that fight. Just like Sugar Ray Leonard beat Marvin Hagler, just how Alexander Usyk beat Anthony Joshua.
Don't it?
Now, don't get me wrong, it takes a very special fighter to do that, because not every smaller fighter can do that against a larger fighter of that, nature. But that's how we know Floyd is on an all-time great level.
Canelo Alvarez fans, y'all pissed off hearing this right now, huh? Man, I can't stand this pinchy mayate dante. He's always telling the damn truth. You got that right. And you're going to keep getting the whole truth. That's why you keep coming back.
This dude is such a moron. Oh, boy.
So back to my point. When is Canelo going to do the same things Floyd Mayweather did? When is he going to go and fight those much bigger, stronger, younger, undefeated champions like Floyd did when he beat Canelo Alvarez? In order to do...
Right, but that was debatably the second greatest win of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s career. The greatest win of his career is the Manny Pacquiao win. Just in terms of the all-time greatness of his opponents, the second greatest win of his career is Saul Canelo Alvarez. And then I would debate maybe the third greatest win of his career. You can argue that with a decent amount of fighters. I think that maybe I would debate either a Miguel Cotto or Juan Manuel Marquez. Some would debate maybe Sugar Shane Mosley, but I don't know if I would debate him quite on the level of Miguel Cotto. Some would, say, well, that's wrong because he beat Antonio Margarito and Oscar De La Hoya. Yes, and he also lost to Miguel Cotto. He was a bit older, but he still was at the best point in his career,
That Canelo Alvarez, honestly...
Just like he was at a very decent point in his career when Floyd beat him.
He would not only have to go up to light heavyweight and fight the best, but he would have to go up to cruiserweight and fight the best. Why? Because once again, Floyd Mayweather moved up 5 different weight classes. And when he was at one...
Listen, I get it all in all that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is on a very, very high level, but let me state this. If people are trying to argue that Saul Canelo Alvarez, that, in order to do the same things Floyd Mayweather Jr. did, he'll have to beat Alexander Usyk to be on that level. Well, once again, like I said, it's going to be very hard, in my opinion, for Canelo to catch up to Floyd, at least definitively. But let's not sit here and act like Floyd Mayweather Jr. would fight people that was like 30 pounds heavier. Because if you fought someone like an Alexander Usyk, he would be facing someone that's potentially 30 pounds bigger. And if he's facing a cruiserweight, a natural cruiserweight, that were hydrated at 200 pounds, they could potentially be 30 pounds bigger than Canelo. I don't think Mayweather has ever fought someone that was 30 pounds bigger. He fought some guys that were about 20, to 21 pounds bigger, but that was about it.
47, he was always at a size disadvantage with everyone he faced. 80% of Floyd Mayweather's opponents outweighed him by at least 15 pounds.
Bullshit. When it comes down to it, that's a bunch of horse shit. Miguel Cotto did not outweigh Floyd Mayweather Jr. by 15 pounds. All right? Like I said, there's a couple of opponents that maybe outweighed him by 15 pounds, but Floyd would usually rehydrate around that 147 to 151 range. All right? It is what it is. Ricky Hatton was not no damn 15 pounds heavier than them. Sugar Shane Mosley was not no damn 15 pounds heavier than them. All right? Juan Manuel Marquez was not no damn 15 pounds heavier than them. Ricky Hatton was not no damn 15 pounds heavier than them. Arturo Gatti, Jose Luis Castillo, Robert Guerrero, whoever the hell you want to talk about. Now, there were certain fighters that were about 13 pounds heavier than them, you know, in some of those bigger fights, especially at welterweight or at 154. But besides that, he was not usually on average facing fighters that were 15 pounds heavier. And just stop.
Canelo Alvarez has been fighting guys who have been around his same size, and most of them have no power. Almost everyone that Floyd Mayweather fought had extreme power.
Well, some of them had decent power, and I understand your point there. But at the end of the day, like I said, all these guys are A-grade champions. So it is what it is.
From Maidana to Canelo to Pacquiao to Cotto. When Canelo fought Cotto, he outweighed him damn near by 30 pounds.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. You know, I would have to look at it, but like I said, Miguel Cotto as a person, you know, his max weight, shit, even when Miguel Cotto fought at middleweight, he only rehydrated to 160 pounds. Miguel Cotto ain't no bigger than that of a Terrence Bud Crawford in terms of rehydration weight. I would have to really see that, because I've never seen Miguel Cotto. I've never seen him go above 160 pounds. But I would have to see it. Maybe I'm wrong on that one.
The last time Canelo fought somebody with real power was Gennady Golovkin. When he fought Kovalev, Kovalev wasn't even throwing punches with power, even though he had.
He was trying to. The reason why he couldn't, you know why? Because Canelo Alvarez was out maneuvering him and he was out countering him.
Power. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Let's see who Canelo adds to his list, his long list of fighters that he says he's not going to fight. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Just want to say Happy New Year to everybody. I'm on to the next one. Let me tell you guys about this.
Anyways, that's really about it for this video. But I just thought that I would review that because, once again, I don't think I've seen a more delusional pair of people between Dante's Boxing Nation and probably that of Aki TV. I think that those tend to be the most delusional people that I think I personally ever hear talking about boxing. I mean, it's almost it's almost impossible to live up to those standards overall of delusion, but somehow they surpass them almost every week. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that because I found it particularly interesting. But I'll talk to you all later.